Welcome to the Female Finance Collective podcast, where we encourage women to have open and honest conversations about all things money.
I'm Jen, and I struggled for many years with debt and feeling financially overwhelmed, so I know how frustrating it can be. Now I'm passionate about helping women confidently take control of their personal finances.
And I'm Meri-Li. As a financial planner, I've had the privilege of working with hundreds of women who've transformed their financial lives. I'm excited to share my insights to help you on your financial journey.
Hey, I'm Sybil. I built my dream life traveling the world and creating financial freedom on a teacher's salary. Now I help women take charge of their money and burn brighter in life.
Let's start the money conversation.
So today we're going to talk about one of the topics or questions that I get asked the most, and it is, should you save or pay off debt first? This is a big topic. There's a lot of information out there when you're reading on the internet, and everyone's got a different opinion. So as we go through this, question or dilemma, you really need to think about what makes the most sense for your finances, but we will share some, important things to consider when it comes to making this decision. So the way that I approach this is when you're thinking between paying off debt or saving, I like to think of an emergency fund first. So just setting aside even $1,000 or $2,000 that can go to support you in an emergency. Put that in a separate account, label the account your emergency fund or safety fund or whatever name you connect with, and start there. So before you're thinking about making any extra debt payments or making any extra savings, just start with the emergency fund, because that's going to help you to get out of the debt cycle eventually. So that's the first starting point. And that cushion is going to step in anytime you have an unexpected home repair or a car bill that's higher than you might have thought it would be. And that's going to be the first starting point when it comes to this decision. Um, what?
Yeah, I agree, Meri-Li. I've been a big proponent of emergency savings for a long time. And recently I'm needing it more for that home things, right? We just got a new water heater last month. This month we're going to replace our HVAC system. We bought a house knowing we were going to need to replace these things. And so therefore I kind of tried to build up our emergency fund, and then now I'm spending from it. And so one thing to remember about the case for saving in an emergency fund specifically is sometimes if you're spending some of it, like I am intentionally spending from that fund, I also need to intentionally make sure I'm putting back into my budget, that I'm contributing to it again. So I'm growing it back up, right? Because if there was a job loss, or like all three of us have variable incomes, right? Some months you make more money than others being a small business owner. So I know these kinds of emergency that are real emergencies, like losing a job is, you really have to rely on that money, are there, but also those emergencies that you can kind of plan for. I'm going to need a new water heater. I'm going to need a new HVAC system. That's expensive. I'm going to need to make sure I have that money kind of sitting in that bucket. We talk a lot here about buckets of money, right? And so it's a real important case for saving also when you have debt.
Yeah. And the reality check is if you have kids, pets, a house, cars, or a business, those are all parts of life where you can have more emergencies. So the more of those that you have, if you have multiple properties, like if you have a cottage and a house, there's just more things that need to be updated or can go wrong. So thinking about those different categories and really looking ahead over the next year, the next few years, like what could come up? How old is our roof? How old is the car? Like, what's the plan for the replacement of some of these items? That can really be helpful when you're considering the case for saving.
Yes.
Is thinking ahead to not just long-term retirement, but what are the short and medium-term purchases or needs that you have.
Right. And having that savings then I mean, you've basically said this. I'm just gonna like be really blunt about it. That prevents you from using your debt, right? That prevents you from having to grab your credit card when your kid breaks their arm and you have this like big unexpected medical expense, right? Because now you've got this money that you can pull from instead of grabbing for your credit card, which is what you often have to do when you don't have any money saved up. And those like money bombs, that's an episode that we recently
Yes.
shared. When those money bombs drop, you've got something to reach for other than the credit card, right? Which then just makes the debt cycle continue.
Yeah. And then the flip side of that is, well, what's the case for paying off debt? And one of the kind of the most challenging situations that I see is when people have very high interest rate debt. So I'm thinking debt that's kind of like, 20% plus. The interest on that is such a high rate that it really is, difficult to get ahead. So that becomes debt that you want to focus on and want to pay down because it's going to be very meaningful to do so. It's going to free up more cash flow. It's going to get that interest down. So definitely, if you have very high interest rate debt, that is a case for directing money and choosing the debt payment side of the equation.
Yeah, because it's costing you so much money in that, right? You are sort of, I feel like I've heard you say this, Meri-Li, and I really love the way you phrase it. So that's why I'm going back to your words. But you've talked about paying off your debt and not paying that interest is kind of like saving because you're saving the amount of money that you would be putting towards that debt. So if you can like shift the way you think about it a little bit, yes, you are putting money toward your debt and not putting it in a high yield savings account, but you are saving in the long term because that's less money that's going to go out in the end. I really love that way that you phrase that and that way of thinking because I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in like, oh, I have to have the savings that we forget that like this also is sort of a way of saving. It's just like a little out of the box, right? It's not what we traditionally think of as like transferring money to a savings account.
It's a big way of savings when your interest rate is above 20%, because I don't know what investments you guys might have, but my investments on a typical day don't make 20%, right? And so interest adds up both ways. The positive, in your investments and the negative in your debts. And so when we're talking about high interest rate debt, like credit cards, it definitely is saving. The more you can pay it, getting to a point of paying it off every single month saves you a ton of money in interest. There is no doubt about it. And then it affects your cash flow. We talked about this a little bit in last week's episode, right? Is how much cash flow do you have that month? Because the cash flow is the positive when you hit the 0 point, right? And you want to spend, how much do I have to spend and save, as we just talked about, the big case for saving of your emergency fund and also for your future. So thinking about that is a way to save. I
Right.
love
Yeah.
that reframe.
Yeah, and some people can clearly see, like when they think of the case for saving or the case for paying off debt, some people may clearly choose one path or the other. So if you have a lot of high interest rate debt, you may choose to go with debt repayment for a period of time. And remember that there's nothing in your finances that you can't change. There's always flexibility. So you could focus on debt payment for 3 months and then you could decide to focus on savings for a couple of months. Like you're able to change your plan from time to time. So nothing is set in stone or forever. But what I do find a lot of people do is they take a balanced approach. So they're doing some saving. So, they may participate in their workplace retirement plan, making sure that they get that match. And then if they feel like they have a lot of debt, then with any extra funds, they're dedicating that towards debt. So they're doing a little bit of both, achieving both goals. And that can be a great way to approach it as well, because then you're not feeling like you're prioritizing one thing over the other. You're able to achieve both your debt payment and your savings goals together.
For
Yeah, I
sure.
love that. I think too, even if you're, it doesn't have to be, first of all, yes to the flexibility, right? You're not in a lifelong commitment with one plan. It can change from month to month. You might do it one month and be like, whoa, that was too tight. I put too much money toward my credit card and then I needed it at the end of the month. You might think, oh, I actually had some money left over, or figure out a place where you could cut back a little bit and then change it the next month, right? But I think too, what I like to help people with, when people ask me about this, I like to talk about percentages. So sometimes people are like, how much money should I put in savings every month? Well, it's not necessarily a dollar amount, especially for people who have like commissioned work or variable income. Maybe try with a percentage. So maybe all of the money that you have in your budget that's like extra, that's your like debt and savings money. Maybe you try like 90% goes to my debt payoff, 10% of that money goes towards savings. And that percentage obviously could change. You could go 50-50 or whatever works for you. But I do think sometimes we get really wrapped up in this like dollar amount. Like, I should be putting this much money in my retirement, or I should be paying this much money. Where if we think about it in terms of percentage, that becomes a little bit easier to like navigate every month. And then when you want to when you want to adjust, like you were suggesting, Meri-Li, you could just adjust your percentage. So maybe you were 90-10 and you're like, okay, my debt is starting to go down and I really would like that savings to be going up. So then maybe you adjust the next month to 80-20. You can make these like small changes, and it's easy for you to like divide it out and figure out what the dollar amount would be based on your current budget that month.
I love that scenario, Jen, because then that is so helpful because we all have different income levels. So if you have a lower income, it may not be reasonable for you to save $1,000 a month. But if you can save 10% of your income, then you're matching your future needs with what you're earning now. So it's a perfect strategy. I also thought of one thing, and because it's tax season right now, we're just wrapping up tax season. One of the things a lot of people forget about is taxes they may owe. So that's always an important savings consideration, specifically if you're self-employed, is to be ahead when it comes to taxes. I have a friend who works in the financial space, and she actually forgot about hers. She forgot about a portion that was due. So the surprises happen to everyone, but the more you can think ahead, ask your accountant, look at your numbers, and just remember about that specific category too. It can be really, really helpful to make sure you don't have a surprise next tax year.
Yeah, one last thing to add to this conversation is the 50-30-20 budgeting, right? So everything we're talking about here, you have to do some budgeting to know how much I'm putting towards my savings, how much I'm putting towards my debt, right? How much I'm spending, because we're also kind of assuming that you've got the overspending in control here too, because if you're still overspending, your debt's getting deeper and deeper. You might need to put more towards it, right? So controlling that overspending based on your income and what you are. But the 50-30-20 real quick is needs. 50% of your budget goes to your needs, 30% goes to your wants, and 20% is those financial goals. So if you have financial goals of building up your savings and your debt, then make sure you have that 20%. Where am I going to make sure I spend less on or make more? And then how am I going to divide that 20% this month, like you said? I think flexibility is the biggest key to all of this, because I know in my life, my financial situation varies so much year to year, month to month at times. And so being able to dynamically be like, I spent more last month than I wanted to, so I'm going to have to pay off more debt this month. Or I was really good at saving, so I'm going to put a little bit more into that, emergency fund or my future, right? So that flexibility can be huge, huge.
Definitely. So hopefully people found this helpful, and hopefully my summary of this episode is there's no right answer. You're not doing it wrong. If you're thinking about saving and you're thinking about paying off your debt and you're figuring out a system that works for you, then you're doing right. You're doing it right. right? That's exactly what we're telling you. Not thinking about it and not being conscious about how much money you want to save and put towards debt and all that. That's where the real challenges fall. So as long as this is on your mind and you're really making thoughtful decisions about your money and where you're saving versus paying off debt and spending and all of that good stuff, then you're on the right track, you know? And so that's really what we want. What we want for everybody. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please don't hesitate to follow and find us on social media. We're Female Finance Collective all over the place. We're easy to find. And we would love to hear from you. So don't hesitate to reach out, and we will see you next week.